America is burning. For a sixth night in a row, anger flooded streets across the deeply divided country. This scale of civil unrest has not been seen here in decades. In George Floyd's home state, protesters marched against systemic racism and police brutality.
All these voices are here is because the same thing keeps happening over and over again. It's the new lynching, you know? And this new coded language and the way that our president represents himself and has a following of KKK members, you know, all this stuff. What do you think about that?
Across the country, a wave of anger has been unleashed.
I think we're at a tipping point, to be honest with you. I think that, this is what happens when you have hundreds of years of oppression and hundreds of years of peaceful protests that seemingly accomplish nothing.
I mean, I have been discriminated against my entire life. So, I'm used to the Trayvon Martins, I'm used to the Ahmaud Arbery's. So I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of the narratives. I'm tired of the hashtags.
There were also scenes of unity as officers showed their solidarity with protesters.
Taking your gloves off, man. Shaking a hand.
Thank you.
Right? Yeah.
Elbow! Use this as a talking stick.
But in Washington, tensions spiked outside the White House as the president blamed left extremists and infiltrators for the unrest.
Radical left criminals, thugs, and others, all throughout our country and throughout the world, will not be allowed to set communities ablaze. We won't let it happen. It harms those who have the least.
But some experts say there is also evidence of far-right extremists stoking the violence. The president's response has drawn criticism from both sides of the political aisle, with some calling for a measured response to the crisis.
All right, let's talk about the ongoing protests and political implications in the U.S. Natasha Lindstedt is a political scientist and professor of international relations and comparative politics at the University of Essex in England. Natasha, good to have you with us. You were in Los Angeles during the police attack on Rodney King and the unrest that followed in 1992. How do you compare what you saw then to the protests now?
Well, the 1992 riots were, of course, incredibly tense. And in fact, over 60 people died and thousands were arrested and many were injured. But the difference was it only lasted 6 days. It didn't spread over to 140 cities. And there was actually a lot of interethnic tension between Asian Americans and African Americans at the time in the LA riots. This is completely different. This has spread to be something that really affects all Americans, and we're seeing more solidarity among people of color and also white Americans who feel that there have been tremendous injustices against African Americans.
Natasha, a lot of people right now looking to the White House for leadership. President Trump has not addressed the people. He has not sought to calm tensions to this point. How much are these protests testing his ability to lead the nation?
Well, yet again, we see another situation that Trump is unable to respond to because he takes it all very personally. He thinks it's all about him. Instead, he has declared Antifa, some left-wing group, a terrorist organization. That doesn't help. He's fanning the flames of racism and refuses to acknowledge his role in fueling right-wing groups and in legitimizing this type of behavior of racism against African Americans.
We have seen protests, similar protests over the past few years that have targeted some of the deep systemic inequalities that you see in U.S. society, the deep racism after Eric Garner was killed in 2014, for example. Yet nothing much seems to have changed in that time. Is there any indication that these protests right now could address these efforts?
It's really hard to say, but I've never seen protests that have been so extensive. As I mentioned, over 140 cities are involved, and it seems to be involving all different groups of people that have just had enough. I mean, one of the things that's important to understand about racism in the U.S. and about how African Americans have been unfairly targeted is that, on average, about 2 African Americans that are unarmed are killed by the police every week, and they're 2.5 times more likely to be killed. It's just that most of the time these things aren't videotaped. So it may be just the end of the road here for people. They feel that they've done enough, they've tried all kinds of peaceful protests, and hopefully we're going to see more people uniting, as some of the video footage showed, behind the need to keep the police accountable and to understand that Black Lives Matter.
All right, Natasha Lindstedt, political scientist at the University of Essex. Thank you so much.
Thank you.